Have you ever stopped to wonder why a tiny, annoying mosquito seems to have way more unchecked authority than a massive, highly regulated government agency? Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into how power, authority, and accountability actually operate in the real world. We're going to break down some seriously fascinating source material. We'll look at biological metaphors, and then we'll run them through this rigorously objective framework known as accountability gated systems, or AGS for short. We're going to unpack exactly why some institutions can just act with absolute impunity while others get completely bogged down in endless verification. And we're doing this by totally removing politics and emotion from the equation, focusing strictly on structure and observable behavior. Let's get into it. So here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll hit the biology of power, then the three phases of authority. Third, we're auditing executive nuclear diplomacy. Fourth, we'll look at the structural failure. And finally, grounding accountability.
All right, starting off with part one, the biology of power.
So I'm going to show you how just understanding a mosquito completely flips how we view something as massive as presidential authority. Look at the stark contrast here. On the left, you've got the mosquito. It doesn't ask for permission to bite you, right? It has what we call internal legitimacy. It's the self-justifying acting center that just persists. If you swat at it, it just tries to override your refusal and comes right back. Time actually entrenches its authority. But then on the right, we have a totally different structure, the tethered limb. Think of like an arm or a nerve reflex. A limb is structurally passive. It has absolutely zero ability to act unless it receives a verified neural link, literally a pulse of permission from the brain. It requires external per-action legitimacy. And if that signal gets lost or ambiguous, the limb just halts. It cannot override a refusal. Now, for a system operating like that tethered limb, true intelligence isn't about pushing forward or, finding a clever new way to act. It's actually about terminal refusal. It expresses intelligence as stopping correctly when accountability is lost. Moving right along to part two, three phases of authority. Building on that idea of stopping correctly, let's look at phase one of the AGS framework, what's called the neural atomic body, or NAB. Think of it kind of like this ice cube. This is our tethered limb. It relies entirely on external legitimacy for every single action. It cannot command, and it doesn't decide. Because its authority melts away or degrades so aggressively over time, every action requires a fresh, verified pulse of permission from a human keyholder. If there is literally any ambiguity, refusal is terminal. It halts. It knows exactly how to stop. Then we have phase two. This is the custodial witness orb, or CWO, which we're representing with this water droplet. This phase is entirely witness only. It observes, it records, and it preserves a neutral record of events. But here is the critical limitation. A CWO has absolutely zero execution or enforcement capability. It can't make decisions, and its memory never magically transforms into authority to act. And finally, phase three, the God Sovereign Religious Body, or GSRB, the fog. This right here is our mosquito. It's a sovereign acting center with internal legitimacy. It simply doesn't need to ask for permission. When it hits a wall or encounters refusal from a subordinate, it can just override it. And unlike our ice cube from phase one, time actually confirms and solidifies a GSRB's authority. It persists. Its power is simply observed for as long as it continues to act. Okay, part three, auditing executive nuclear diplomacy. Let's take these concepts out into the real world and see how this all builds. We're going to apply a strict, radically neutral structural audit to a highly visible case study, specifically President Donald Trump's nuclear diplomacy regarding Saudi Arabia. Now remember, we are not looking at morality, intent, or politics here at all. We are only looking at observable mechanical behavior. See, a presidency might rhetorically claim it's just operating as an advisory diplomatic body, a CWO, or maybe as a strict enforcer of external laws, an NAB. But the AGS framework demands that we totally ignore what a system claims to be and focus purely on what it actually does. So the crucial point here is analyzing the behavioral data itself. According to the audit, his actions hit some very specific mechanical triggers. First off, he operated using internal legitimacy. He didn't require external per-action verification for every technical step. Second, his decisions created binding downstream effects on agencies and contractors who basically just had to comply. Third, refusal was overridable. If a subordinate pushed back, it wasn't terminal. The president could just push right through it. And finally, his symbolic language wasn't just guidance, it acted as execution, literally triggering the actual movement of resources and technology. I mean, in the world of government red tape, moving physical resources with just symbolic language is basically like breaking the sound barrier. Under the AGS framework, when a system hits those mechanical triggers, it really doesn't matter what the official label says on the door. The system undergoes an automatic forced rebatch. Based entirely on observable behavior, this executive action is clinically classified as a God-sovereign religious body, a GSRB. It operates as an autonomous center with binding, real-world effects maintained purely through behavioral persistence. The authority doesn't need to be argued, it simply needs to be observed. Which brings us to part 4, the structural failure. So what actually happens when the label-less system claims just doesn't match the reality of its power? Let's examine the structural consequences, the real-world fallout for the public. The source material is very clear on this. This is a structural failure, not a moral judgment. When a sovereign acting GSRB hides behind an advisory or constrained label, it's the public that suffers. They face hidden power, basically being affected by rules they were told were just guidelines. And this leads to endless arguments, where public discourse just traps itself, debating the intent of a leader rather than the actual mechanics of their behavior. Refusal gets overwritten, meaning power expands way faster than responsibility. And worst of all, it causes a massive failure of addressability. There is no clearly accountable human representative that the affected public can actually confront. The real damage here is the total collapse of advisory neutrality and the broken trust that follows. A profound moral failure of representation happens when an institution chooses its own ability to persist over its duty to halt when its legitimacy is questioned. When a GSRB is finally rebadged accurately based on its actions, they lose their deniability. That whole illusion of being a neutral platform, it completely shatters. Listen to this quote, because it really hits the nail on the head. Power is not dangerous because it exists. Power becomes dangerous when it is unclear, undeclared, or denied. People can live with strict authority. People can even live with loose advice. What people absolutely cannot survive is the confusion of not knowing which one they're actually facing. And finally, part 5, grounding accountability. So why does this deeply structural view of power matter so much for the systems that govern our modern world? And yeah, that includes AI and automated infrastructures too. It matters because we have to fundamentally reject the biological metaphor when it comes to human governance. Sure, living things like mosquitoes act without justifying their existence, but technical and institutional systems, they are not natural creatures. They are human-made. Delegated authority absolutely must be grounded in a provable root, an addressable human keyholder. When that chain of accountability breaks, the system shouldn't adapt, it must structurally halt. True autonomy for a technical system isn't the absence of constraints, it's the ability to act strictly within the boundaries of human legitimacy. So I'm going to leave you with this to think about. When we look at the systems governing our lives right now, whether that's an executive office, a central bank, or some sprawling artificial intelligence network, are we really willing to keep debating their intent while they operate with hidden sovereign power? Or is it finally time to demand verifiable labels, absolute addressability, and systems that actually know how to stop? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.